The Roman Republic was established with the overthrow of the Etruscan kings of Rome in the year 510 BC. The approximately 500 years that follow, that make up the Republican period, sees the Romans, for all intents and purposes, conquer the world. Key moments in the Republic were peace with the major Etruscan city of Tarquinia around 351 BC, the unification of Italy in the 3rd century BC, and the conquest of Greece in 146 BC. And this conquest of Greece was very important with respect to art. Now, what role did these conquests play in the development of Roman art? It familiarized the Romans with the highly developed arts of many peoples, most importantly the Etruscans and the Greeks. In a manner of speaking, Roman art was born fully grown. Through Roman conquests, art and artists were imported with their styles fully matured in many cases. Then, assimilating the arts of many peoples into one coherent work, the Romans were faced with severe challenges. One example of this was in solving the seeming contradiction of philosophies between the Greeks and the Etruscans, their two major influences. Now, how were the Greek and Etruscan works characterized? Greeks were concerned with idealization in their art, and by contrast, the Etruscans were more concerned with expression and realism. So the Etruscan idea is perhaps realism of idea as opposed to illusion, as was conveyed so magnificently by the Greeks. We're going to start by looking at Republican period sculpture. This is a portrait of a Roman in marble, life-size, and this bust of a man illustrates well the combination of Greek and Roman ideals. What can we say about this fellow in contrast to Greek sculpture? He's certainly older than what we generally saw in Greek sculpture. He appears to be lost in thought, and maybe most importantly, he's highly individualized. These concepts are all elements of realism, and this will be the major Roman association. The sculptural means of illusionistic naturalism, however, still indicates a strong influence of the Greeks. So what the Romans did, in a sense, was use a foreign language to express a local sensibility. We're going to look now at sculpture from the early empire. As the Romans became more and more accustomed to copying and working with Greek sculptures, some of their resistance to Greek ideals wore down. The seeming victory of realism over idealism will be fought again. It's almost as if they forgot what bothered them about Greek sculpture to begin with. This is Augustus of Prima Porta, a Roman copy from around 20 AD of a Roman original from around 15 BC. It's marble and it stands 6 feet 8 inches tall. Now, if you contrast the figure of Augustus of Prima Porta with the previous slide, Augustus seems much more idealized. He almost seems to be the perfect man. Now, are there other elements of Greek sculpture evident in this piece? Certainly. First off, we see the weight shift developed by Polykleitos. We see a great contrast of tensions and gestures in the arms and the legs. And then another aspect of the work that bespeaks a Greek influence is this tremendous interest in conveying the weight of drapery and its folds. So nearly 200 years after the Romans conquered Greece, and nearly 500 years after Polykleitos ruled Greek sculpture, Greek ideals popped up again. Now, as portrait heads were executed during the early empire, the fight between idealism and realism will rage on. There was a shift in focus, however, that in some ways seemed to bridge the gap between the two contrasting methodologies. This is a sculpture of Vespasian from around 75 AD, marble, again life-size. Now, the change in thought as it relates to Vespasian here was a move toward expression through realism as opposed to simple documentation with realism. Vespasian was a man of humble origin. Perhaps he preferred not to be as idealized as Augustus. Nevertheless, the treatment is in a sense an idealized expression of the ruler. The artist senses or is told the character of the sitter, his ideal, and is forced to bring that to the image. This is a portrait head of Plotinus from the late 3rd century AD. Again done in marble, again life-size. The greater concern for the character of the subject marked later portrait work of the early empire. This portrait head seems to express what kind of man? I would say maybe one of discontent. Plotinus was a philosopher, and he was known for his contempt for the natural world. Plotinus is known to have refused to have any portrait made of himself. He thought the body itself was an awkward reflection of the true spiritual self. His idea was this: why go to the bother of making an even more awkward likeness of a likeness? Some of the qualities of the man show up in this sculpture. Perhaps that is the mark of true realism. Plotinus may be the first person we've seen to question the function or use of art. What a skeptic. The late empire was characterized by many people struggling for the throne and great dissension throughout the empire. At one point, the Roman Empire was ruled by 4 men instead of 1. These 4 rulers were called the Tetrarchs. Constantine came along and put an end to the Tetrarchs. What we see here is a slide of Constantine the Great from the early 4th century AD, marble. Note the height of this piece. It's 8 feet tall, this head. Now, what does the head seem to be saying? I am important. Constantine's head was originally part of an entire seated figure that stood some 30 feet tall. Constantine's importance as the first Christian emperor is seen through the following 4 elements. 1, size, obviously. 2, simplification of detail. 3, simplification of form. This is a large symbol for a head, rather than a very careful observation such as we've seen in the previous slides. And the 4th thing is that the features in this case are exaggerated, particularly the eyes. Look how large the eyes are in relationship to the overall head. Now, we've seen this protesting too much formula before in rulers trying to hold on to crumbling empires. Where did we see that? In Egypt, with Ramses II's 4 figures at Abu Simbel. So again, the crumbling of an empire produces corresponding changes in art. So the Roman situation is highly similar to the Egyptian situation in this case. We're going to move now to Roman painting. Now, in most cases, the terrible forces of nature have been responsible for the destruction and erosion of great art of the past. In the case of Roman painting, we can thank a natural disaster for its preservation. In AD 63, a large earthquake struck Pompeii. 17 years later found much of Pompeii rebuilt when the volcano Vesuvius erupted, destroying and burying Pompeii and Herculaneum. This burial both destroyed and preserved Roman life of the late Republican period and early imperial periods until its excavation began in the 18th century. Thus, we have a magnificent record of Roman painting, unlike the Greeks, although Roman painting perhaps gives us a good clue as to large issues of concern in Greek painting. Now, Pompeian and Herculaneum wall painting is divided into 4 styles in terms of their progression from flat to spatial concerns. These 4 styles evolved in succession, but often overlapped and coexisted. The 4 styles are called the first style, second style, third style, and fourth style. How about that? The first style is also called incrustation, and this dates from around 200 to 60 BC. The second style was called architectural at first and was later called illusionistic, and this dates from around 50 BC. The third style was called ornate, and that dates from around 20 BC to 60 AD, and the fourth style was called intricate, and this dates from around 60 AD to 79 AD. What you're looking at here is a first style wall painting in the Samnite house of Herculaneum from the late 2nd century BC. Now, this first style, called incrustation, divided the wall into various sections of flat, bright colors. This simple form is derived from Hellenistic art. Aspects of the first style would show up in the other 3 styles as a large organizing force in terms of color. This is an architectural view, a wall painting from a villa at Boscoreale near Naples from the 1st century BC. This second style, called architectural, is so named for its use of architectural forms in dividing the wall space to create the sense of a continuation of the room space. This illusion will be a large part of the success of the introduction of figures who are both illusionistic themselves and in that space. This is a view of a garden, a wall painting from the villa of Livia at Prima Porta from around 20 BC. Now, this scene shows just how effective the architectural style could be in terms of creating an almost window-like effect. The illusion of space in the open in this and the following slide is convincing, and this is a new concept as far as representing the world on a flat two-dimensional surface. This is the Lastrygonians hurling rocks at the fleet of Odysseus, a wall painting from a house on the Esquiline Hill in Rome from the late 1st century BC. Now, the architectural forms which would border these spaces that are not seen here make the space work, and in this case denoted different adventures depicted on Odysseus' journey home after the fall of Troy. This new concept of space is very important today. In fact, it fueled virtually all painting from the Renaissance up to the 20th century. To debate whether it all started with the Romans, when we have no earlier examples or not, seems exemplary of the reluctance of art historians to give the Romans credit for being more than Greek clones. It's silly. let's give the Romans credit for a major advance and contribution to the history of Western art. This is the Ixion room from Pompeii, dating from 63 AD to 79 AD. Now, in the third style, also called ornate, illusionary views of space were confined within picture frames, so to speak. The simulated architecture disappeared at this time, and the views almost seemed to float within their frames. Additionally, you might have noticed the broad areas of color of the first style reappeared. The still life that we'll look at shortly also is a motif typical of the third style. Here we have fourth style wall paintings in the Domus Aurea of Nero from Rome, 64 AD to 68 AD. Now, the fourth style was also called intricate, and it combined elements of all of the styles. Architectural elements and forms that had been lost in the third style reappeared now. Perhaps this accumulation of elements is in keeping with the fact that much repair and rebuilding went on in this period following the earthquake. It would only have been natural to use new elements when repairing older areas, yet one would have been conscious of the need for all the styles to work together with this fourth or rebuilding style. This is Peaches and Glass Jar, a wall painting from Herculaneum from around 50 AD. Now, this painting is an important record of an artist apparently concerned with the idea of working directly from nature, and not greatly preoccupied with making some important religious, patriarchal, or historical statement. This painting represents art for art's sake. Now, while still life masters such as Chardin, Giorgio Morandi, and Cezanne may not have looked to this painting for inspiration, that does not diminish its importance in the formulation of the idea of still life painting. This is a second major innovation in painting by the Romans. This is scenes of a Dionysiac mystery cult, a mural frieze from around 50 BC from the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii. Now, the importance of that previous still life can be seen in how we view this image. What do we focus on here? Or what do we attempt to explain? The story. Did we focus on that in the still life? No. We were concerned with how it was done. The color, the light, the texture, and the space filled our thoughts. So with the still life painting, we have the birth of pure painting, almost non-objective art in a sense. This is a portrait of a boy from the Fayum, Lower Egypt, 2nd century AD. It's encaustic on panel. It's about 15.5 by 7.5 inches. The concern with realism in painting portraits is evidenced in this work, which was done in encaustic, the hot wax medium that we talked about with respect to the painting of Greek sculpture. Now, these portraits were done on wooden mummy cases. Think of this as a low-budget sarcophagus of the Roman Empire during its rule over Egypt. Painting abilities and concerns here fuse with the Roman interest in portraiture to give us some of the most early outstanding examples of portrait paintings. These Fayum portraits are really tremendous things to look at. They're also very strong in that it's a difficult media to achieve any blending techniques with, and yet this head is quite beautifully and subtly modeled. This slide is of Africa, a floor mosaic in the Roman villa at Piazza Arena from the early 4th century AD. Now, throughout the role of the Romans, mosaics of both the floor and wall variety were a common practice of Roman artists. While certainly not new, they took this painting-like media to new heights. In some mosaics, as many as 50 single bits were used to model one eye and copy the look of a painting. While on the floor, these mosaics were meant to be looked at quite closely. However, it can be concluded that Roman artists may have tired of this minute way of working for a couple of reasons. One, there was no need to have this tremendous detail on walls, and secondly, the question begs asking, why duplicate painting? Many Roman artists were interested in exploring the potential of the mosaic itself, rather than duplicating painting. In closing, Roman artist itself, or Roman painting itself, justifies the Romans' importance and their own contribution to art. Now we'll go to Roman architecture. While this again is highly derivative of the Greeks initially, it will bring a massive contribution to architecture, not only in terms of stylistic innovations, but largely through new construction techniques and the use of new building materials which would allow for those stylistic innovations. We'll begin here with Republican period architecture. This is the Temple of Fortuna Virilis from Rome, the late 2nd century BC. The Temple of Fortuna Virilis is a typical Roman temple of the late 2nd century BC. Now, there are some Greek elements and some Etruscan elements that we want to examine here. The Greek elements are seen in three ways. One, the overall design. Two, you recognize the Ionic order, and we'll find that unusual with the Romans as we go along. And three, it employed a single cella. Now, Etruscan elements in the Temple of Fortuna Virilis are found in the high podium, the deep porch, and the fact that you can enter this temple only from the front. A Roman characteristic that is added is the engagement of the columns along the cella, and this makes the columns along the cella strictly decorative. This construction is then labeled pseudo-peripteral. This is the Temple of the Sibyl from Tivoli, early 1st century BC. The Temple of the Sibyl also bears great resemblance to the Greek tholos, or round temple. Here the Romans adapt this idea to their own use in a number of ways. First thing that's different is that the columns are monolithic. They're one piece, as opposed to the sections that were used by the Greeks. Greek columns were composed of many different pieces stacked one on top of one another. In the Roman architectural world, they used monolithic columns. Secondly here, the frieze is used for a decorative pattern, as opposed to narrative relief sculpture that we saw with the Greeks. That's a major difference. Third, the Temple of the Sibyl stands on a podium, and it was entered by a single flight of stairs. And fourth, something you can't quite see here, but it's a major innovation, is that the cella wall was not built of cut stone, but of concrete. And we'll look more closely at that innovation later on. The departures from the Greek model start during the Republican period, but they're not fully realized until the days of the early empire. This is the Maison Carrée in Nimes from around the year 1 to 10 AD. This is a sort of last great reliance on the Greek orders from the early empire, and it differs from the Temple of Fortuna Virilis in three ways. First, it's larger. Second, it's constructed of marble. And third, look at the top of the columns. You'll notice that now the Corinthian order is being employed, and this is much more typical of the Romans. This work is indicative of a particular patron's taste, as opposed to that of an artist interested in making a truly Roman statement. While columns and certain other elements of the Greek orders will persist, from this point on, Roman architecture would develop its own unique and distinct language of forms. Probably the most important aspect of Roman architecture is the development of and reliance on the arch. This is the Pont du Gard from Nimes, France, early 1st century AD. Now, the Pont du Gard functioned as a bridge and as an aqueduct to carry water. Now, Roman aqueducts were incredible feats of engineering. Some of these aqueducts carried water as far as 50 miles solely by the use of gravity, slowly descending along the way. Now, the Pont du Gard shows the early development of an architectural form that was not reliant wholly or exclusively on the Greeks. The perfection of the arch and its repetition are exceeded only by the transparency of the overall form. This was a structure built to work with the landscape, and its design largely succeeds in this case. Now the sacred cow of Roman architecture, the Colosseum, from Rome, 72 to 80 AD. The Colosseum is an amphitheater, or two theaters enclosing an oval space. This literally is the ancestor of Busch Stadium. In fact, if you think about Busch Stadium and the arches that are viewable at the top of it, it owes a great deal to the Colosseum. Now, this massive structure was made possible by the construction method of using concrete. This was begun by Vespasian and dedicated by Titus. The Colosseum is most unusual in that it employed all three Greek architectural orders simultaneously. The Doric order was used on the lower level, the Ionic order on the second level, and the Corinthian order on the third level. Now, the ordering by level was determined by aesthetics, not function. By that I mean which order looked like it could hold the most weight, and so on. Now, this aerial view shows the basements and the catacombs of the Colosseum, which are as fascinating themselves as the very famous exterior. This is a view of the outer wall of the Colosseum. A complex system of vaults held this structure up. It's over 161 feet high. The vaulting to carry weight ran both radially and concentrically to better distribute the massive weight of this relatively open structure. There were 76 entrances from the exterior. This is a reconstruction drawing of the markets of Trajan by Apollodorus of Damascus from Rome from around 100 to 112 AD. The markets of Trajan continue to utilize the arch and the elaborate vaulting system that was developed in the Colosseum. Here's an interior of the Great Hall of Trajan's markets. While the markets and the Colosseum used the round arch and the barrel vault in developing a new Roman language, they are to Roman architecture what the ABCs are to fine literature. Here we see the arch, the barrel vault, and the groin vault. The round arch and the barrel vault seen here would soon give way to that much more complex construction that would revolutionize architecture. Now, when you were building a vault such as this, you'd use a temporary form called centering, and this would be used to hold the size and shape of the vault, as well as hold it together during construction. With the use of concrete, the development of concrete, centering was used only to hold the liquid mass together until it hardened. Now, the use of concrete, centering, and the barrel vault that you see in the center here, these all join together to form the much more visually intricate form, the groin vault that you see on the right. Now, the groin vault can be seen as introducing the possibility of constructing a vast interior open space of greater flexibility. Think of the inner space limitations of the barrel vault. Would you like your home to depend solely on this method of construction? Now, the experiments with groin vaults no doubt led to the idea of a dome, a tremendous concept in light of the exterior and interior impact of that form. A groin vault, such as you see here, is essentially two intersecting barrel vaults. And a vault is just simply a continuation of an arch. Here we have the Pantheon in Rome from 118 to 125 AD. Now, the Pantheon is a delight both in architectural form and in unencumbered space. It's 140 feet high, and its diameter is 144 feet. And it's conceived of as the meeting of two fundamentally opposed circles. The exterior is an unusual combination of the Greek temple with a brand new conception of a building. While this rectangular portico may seem strange, it's actually functional in that it helps buttress the dome weight, or support the weight of the dome. The thickness of the dome varies from 20 feet near the base to approximately 4 feet toward the oculus, and the oculus was an opening 30 feet in diameter which lit the space. This is the interior of the Pantheon. It's painted by an artist called Panini from around 1740, oil on canvas, 50 by 39 inches. Now, this painting of the interior shows how the dome is coffered with sunken panels, and these sunken panels that you see in the dome itself helped reduce the weight of the dome. The marvel of this building is not its mass, but its space created by mass. The Pantheon is about the difference between seeing to appreciate a building and feeling to appreciate a space. This is truly a marvel. How could the Romans possibly be viewed as second-rate after this? This is the Arch of Titus in Rome after 81 AD. The Roman architecture also took the form of monumental triumphal arches. Such a commemorative monument is this Arch of Titus, built to celebrate the emperor's victories. This is a single arch supported by massive piers. The superstructure, or what's called the attic, bears the inscription, calling attention to visitors what is being commemorated in the relief sculpture within the arch. This is spoils from the temple in Jerusalem, a relief in the passageway from the Arch of Titus in Rome. It's marble. Now, this slide shows the relief in the passageway of the arch. It's nearly 8 feet tall, and that may be something that's a little bit difficult to discern in looking at the arch itself. This is the Triumph of Titus, a relief in the passageway from the Arch of Titus. Now, these deep reliefs contributed to the broken nature of the image now. The resulting pattern of light and shadow originally must have suggested both great depth and movement through all the rhythms that were created by the shadows. Now, the arch itself, combining Ionic and Corinthian orders, seems an elaborate form used to call attention to these relief works that glorified the emperor. You could argue that these are a tad ostentatious. This is the Column of Trajan, the lower portion from Rome, 106 to 113 AD, marble. The height of the relief band is approximately 50 inches, just a shade over 4 feet. Now, this is another commemorative monument, the Column of Trajan. Originally it was 128 feet tall and was topped by a statue of Trajan, who was commemorated through his battles of the Dacian Wars. The continual frieze got larger with height and stretched to a length of approximately 656 feet long. The relief here is flatter and documents many episodes. While continuous, it almost might be read like a comic book. Creation of space, seen in the Arch of Titus reliefs, was sacrificed for the clarity of the narrative. Buildings, horses, and the like are often depicted or seen smaller than the figures. In this way, the reliefs are almost like caricatures in that they accentuate the essential. The column itself would be repeated in many later columns. Figures in the sculpture will reappear in the conventions of medieval art, which often distorted images to make meanings clear. Here, pattern and design took precedence over idealized views of the human figure. We go now to architecture of the late Empire. The art of more distant cultures combined with Greek influences in the late Empire to form some unusual, if less significant, forms. This is Al-Khazneh, the Treasury, and Petra from the 2nd century AD. Now, the Treasury is a peculiar combination of the Greek architectural orders with the interior concept of the rock-cut tomb. However, the temple in this case is apparently no more than a facade. Compare this with the concept of the Pont du Gard, or even the temple of Queen Hatshepsut that we saw in our Egyptian studies, both of which sought to work with their surroundings. I'm not sure the Treasury does quite as good a job. We're going to look now at architecture under Constantine. This is the Basilica of Constantine from Rome, around 307 to 320 AD. If it's a late work, then bigger must be better. Only a small portion of the Basilica of Constantine remains standing to this day. The reconstruction drawing and plan in your text shows how both the barrel vault and groin vault construction methods were used in building the Basilica of Constantine. Here is the Arch of Constantine from Rome, 312 to 315 AD. The arch itself cannot be seen as any great accomplishment. It was doubtless taken in idea from the Arch of Titus, and it really is a backward-looking compilation of no intense significance, and it certainly does not represent a step forward in Roman architecture. The arch largely symbolizes the end of a Roman domination of art and the world, much like the Venus de Milo signaled the end of Greek domination of its time. These are medallions from 117 AD to 138 AD and the frieze from the early 4th century from the Arch of Constantine. This is a detail from the arch, and through this we can observe that individualized portraiture and idealism have disappeared. Now the conveyance of an idea takes precedence over all other concerns. What seems like a step backward is actually the beginning of an evolution toward a new style. Again, we raise the question as we close our study of the Romans, where else to go after perfection is realized?